Ladies and gentlemen, the FootballScoop Podcast is back, and I am more excited than ever. Hot niggity dog. Gentlemen, great to see you. Today, I'm Scott Roussel, joined by college football experts John Brice and Zach Barnett, both of whom attended the Director of Football Operations meetings held in Frisco, Texas last week. 2 days. Gentlemen, give me a quick recap. What's the buzz going on there? I have been to that meeting probably for 10 years. Didn't go this year. And I know a lot about what generally is going on, but often it's the sidebar conversations. What's hot in the industry? What has those guys and ladies up at night? What are they worried about in this profession?
I think
Money.
Zach did an excellent job with it, and I just sort of rode his coattails in our story this week. But really, it's money concerns, and it's the skyrocketing costs of everything in the industry. And then it was, frankly, some folks wanting to ask us what we were hearing out there. And I found that very interesting, be it from facilities maneuvering to television and broadcasting contracts to the NIL landscape. I think those were, in my opinion, the primary topics, along with recruiting camps and staff sizes.
Yeah, in 2020, 2021, the demand was low for travel, for hotel rooms, for meals, and so the prices reflected that. And now, we've seen this, across the economy. Demand is now rebounded to 2019 levels and then some, and so prices have reflected that. And so it is we heard from Group of Five, Power Five, that just costs are up. And of course, these schools are going to they're still going to travel, but no one in any business office is going to be thrilled to say that what you got for X amount in 2021 is now double what it is in 2023. And so it's on, these operations professionals to find their way around that to the best of their abilities. And so they're just sharing best practices about, getting meals, managing the budget, finding places to stay. And so you're seeing, a lot of schools stay further out away from the college town where they're maybe playing, as a way to, get around, skyrocketing costs, 2-night minimums that are now common in the travel industry.
Yeah, I find it interesting. I believe most people foresee the economy is not in a great spot and precarious, perhaps for the next year or two. But that's not always the case with college athletics. College athletics is probably somewhat immune to that. TV contracts are locked in. Yes, donors, could dry up a little bit, but college athletics has a lot of money generally, especially we're talking about college football. So that's a little different when they're willing to pay those things, and that's one of the few things that people will splurge on. They will go see their team. They will travel with their team. So hotels are a challenge. Okay, what else other than economics?
I mean, I agree with you to a certain extent, Scott. I also would look and for all the places like a Tennessee last year that saw tremendous renewed enthusiasm with that program, with the job that Josh Heupel and company did, and the way they sort of recaptured their fan base and captured a lot of eyeballs across America and sold more tickets than they had in a really long time. There's a lot of ticket inventory available at a lot of other places. And I think that continues to be a concern for a lot of people, just like we touched on in our piece earlier this week. There's concern, and it's not a new topic, but it's still a developing one, between NIL dollars versus capital campaign dollars. And I can tell you point blank, that's a conversation that we heard about last week in Frisco at those DFO meetings. It's a conversation I've heard about at length here in South Bend, Indiana, affecting Notre Dame, which is a very, very wealthy institution with a phenomenal endowment and a great heritage. It's a concern. So I still think that dollars are very much a concern. And maybe the most interesting thing I heard in that regard, and I think Zach heard some of it as well, were people starting to say some stuff out loud that we haven't heard in quite a while. And that is, we can treat everybody well, but we have to acknowledge that football is different. We have to admit that football is different. We have to admit that things with football are different and that football drives everything else. And we no longer can act like that's not the case. And I thought to hear that discussed so openly in a room was very enlightening and sort of tells you where things are going, because if these conversations are being held in Frisco, that means that they're being held on these campuses and at levels even above DFOs. And that means it's coming down from athletic department CFOs, athletic department ADs. And I do think that money concerns and the gap between the football halves and everyone else is a major component and a major concern right now.
Yeah, I live in Baton Rouge, and LSU ladies basketball just went on that just incredible run, and so they were in the press a lot. And I think Angel Reese, one of the best players in the team, very outspoken. They win the national championship, and somebody's talking to her about the economics of college basketball, and she was quick to point out football drives everything. Right? This is Joe Burrow's place. He built this place. And they treat me like that, but it's because of football revenue. So, man, I think on campuses nationwide, I think people understand.
Yeah.
Football.
Yeah. Here, I wanted to find this direct quote from one of the meetings, because I thought that this was more of a mindset that was shared publicly in these settings and articulated more clearly than what we've heard it perhaps in the past, or certainly it isn't the narrative that we often hear in a public media forum. And that was people all have to know that football drives it, whether they accept it or not. Football drives it. And I think that's the reality. We've known that's the reality, but that's one that's having to be confronted even more. They specifically pointed to because of expansion and because that has highlighted it, whether it's the additions of USC and UCLA to the Big Ten and how much more that has highlighted football at those two institutions versus the other sports there, or whether it's the growing of Oklahoma and Texas to the SEC. I just found that as very illuminating. I would love to hear more talks like that and hear more ideas of what that's going to relate to.
All right. How about dollars? So we know at the SEC Big Ten level, dollars are just astronomical. And the financial concerns aren't really financial concerns. They're interesting conversations. Boy, the group of five level, financial concerns are very real. And, you're shifting schedules to playing on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays. It's a whole new world for those guys. And TV money is drying up in some conferences. How do they make it happen? I mean, smoke and mirrors. Seriously, how do they do it?
It's a lot of conversations with higher ups within your department, within university, of hey, this is where it's at. Like these are the options we're considering. This is how we're getting around it, and then it's being really skillful with how you manage your budget, where you allot things, and being creative. They were talking about one school. We were privileged to sit in with the Sunbelt DFOs, and they were talking about it's probably, maybe the Mountain West has an argument here, but the hardest campuses to get to. You got a lot of small towns that are a good bit of ways from major airports, so it's being creative about where you stay, about where you get your meals. I'm John, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I live in Monroe. It's pretty common to use the local Baptist or Catholic church to cater your meals. Not that the church does it, but that's where your meals are had. So those people have to be really creative and really skillful and wear a lot of hats and be really good at their jobs, because at the end of the day, this stuff's going to happen. It's up to them to figure out how to make it happen.
Yeah, the logistical gymnastics that are required of DFOs is pretty phenomenal. And maybe one could argue, okay, it's larger because I think in one of the meetings we heard an SEC program say that they travel 300 or 350 on their first plane, and if they're in the playoffs, they'll take another 300 to 400 people. I mean, whereas you're talking a G5 program that has 180 people on a charter, but then 180 people chartering into, like you alluded to, Zach, Jonesboro, Arkansas is a lot different than logistically handling two planes of 300 to 400 people apiece that are chartering into Miami-Dade. So I think that those are really incredible components of the job, incredible tasks that are confronted by those people. Another thing that stood out to me that I still intend to write on this week is we said in one of the meetings the female empowerment in DFO positions around college football. And I believe the room I was in at that seminar that morning had 16 either head or assistant DFOs. And our friend Troy from Louisiana noted that in 2012, it might have been one or two. So much greater representation in that regard. There was a female panel that I thought was really enlightening. That's what I hope to do write on later this week. And then the discussion of how to grow that realm of the industry even more. And then also talking about just growing not only to have more females in DFO roles, but then how to female DFOs become female college football chiefs of staff and so on. So those were some other elements that were discussed that I found very interesting from our time at Frisco last week.
Yeah, I know you have that piece coming, John. One quote that from that DFO panel, that women's panel, was like, one of the panelists said, maybe we don't even need this next year because it's become so commonplace. And it's, thinking back to the people we were able to meet, it was far more common for the two representatives to both be women than it was for them to both be dudes. Like, it is a tremendous growth for women, because I think programs are recognizing that, they benefit from having women in those roles, and they quite often get those opportunities and shine in them.
When I started going to these things like 08, 09, and they were held in conjunction with the AFCA conference in January, it was the football operations world was largely former coaches, sometimes still coaches, almost entirely male, like you said. Might have been one female there, maybe two. Traditionally, family, like coaches' daughters, perhaps. Nowadays, it's a professional group. These are people who have been trained in logistics, in operations. It's people who pour their lives into this stuff, and they absolutely love it, and they're really, really good at it. It's the profession has evolved into a good place. It's good to see.
Can I share
one
quick story?
Please.
So this was in the piece, but I also wanted to share it here. Was we had the opportunity to sit in on the SEC meetings, and I'm just kind of sitting there. It's quiet. We're waiting for everyone to file in. And then, I'm seated with my back to the door. So you hear two people walk in, you look up, and it's they're wearing Oklahoma stuff. And it's kind of like, okay, wasn't expecting that, but this is happening. And so they kind of sensed it, and they were like, yeah, we thought about going to the Big 12, but kind of figured it would make more sense to come here. So they introduced themselves. I'm Mississippi State, South Carolina. Nice to meet you. And then, the room settles down as it does, and it's like, okay, well, we'll lock the door before Texas comes in. And that kind of broke the ice. Of course, they didn't lock the door. The Texas contingent was welcomed. Everyone played nice in the sandbox. They shared ideas. One interesting, Texas is going to stay in a different hotel in Birmingham that I don't believe no one else in the room uses when they go to visit Alabama. So maybe the Longhorns win, and now everyone changes their business in Birmingham when they go play the Tide.
It was one other thing to note about those sessions are each one of those individuals understands how much pressure is on their counterparts at these other conference or national institutions around the country. There's so much sharing. There's so much collaboration. And we know it. I think our friend Sherrod at Marshall has done some site visits even in the past for Matt Transu over at James Madison or vice versa. It's just really interesting to see how some of these folks work together and try to collaborate together. One other note that I found interesting from that, and it's something we've all talked about in our FootballScoop Slack, is the expanded college football playoffs and that upcoming schedule, and how much it will impact the DFOs specifically around the AFCA convention. And they made it very clear that they're drifting toward very likely not having a set program at the AFCA convention anymore in January because of their current on-campus demands of the job, because they're hosting people from the transfer portal on official visits, because they could be going in any number of directions if their programs are parts of the college football playoff. And they said that very likely they'll drift toward maybe just hosting a social there at the AFCA host site, so that it's still an opportunity for folks to get together and network if they happen to have time. But they're looking more toward making the May meeting perhaps a half day longer and going in even more in depth there.
Yeah, the expanded playoff is just going to have so many ripple effects. The schedule is just built out the way it does. You have that lull in December where you have the awards banquet, coaches go recruiting, players take finals, the AFCA convention in early January. It's just, and now we're stretching the season out a month, and it's just going to have a lot of ripple effects, and going to be interesting to watch from an inside baseball perspective.
Yeah, I haven't spoken to Todd Berry about this in a couple of months now, but there's real concern. But there's going to be a lot of change involved with this upcoming January 2024 AFCA, and thinking through an even 25. They're contemplating shifting some dates, and the recruiting calendar is in flux.
Yeah,
and there's a lot of changes going on here.
Yeah, we saw that in this past January with a lot of coaches had to stay home because they were hosting portal kids during the convention.
Yeah, and more than ever, flew in on Sunday and out on Monday, or in on Monday. I know some coaches that flew in Monday morning and out Monday night, or in Monday and out Tuesday afternoon. So definitely a dramatic impact in the coming months and in the coming cycles of that event. Especially, I believe they're getting ready to transition to about a 10-year stretch where it goes between Nashville and San Antonio. I think the next 2 years are tentatively scheduled for Nashville, and then it's going to rotate year after year between Nashville and San Antonio.
All right, guys, we're 17 minutes in. I just don't know how to avoid the elephant in the room, which is Baby Gronk. So we're going to have to get there in just a second. I do want to talk about sports betting as well. Allow me to say, let's go Baby Gronk and come back to sports betting thereafter. So Zach calls me yesterday. Zach and I talk frequently. And he says, and I said, hey, how was the DFO thing? He says, oh, yeah, I want to talk about that. And he says, so I'm leaving. And I see Baby Gronk. And I was like, okay. So he's 30 seconds into the conversation. I said, can I stop you for a second? I said, is this seriously like Gronk's younger brother? Or is this like a child? It's a child. I'm like, wait, what? I know nothing about this. Zach blows my mind. I couldn't have been more giddy waiting on the article. He releases it this morning. I had to read it twice because I'm in disbelief. This is the worst thing, the best thing, the absolute worst and best thing of all time. Zach, take the floor. Tell me what we all need to know about Baby Gronk.
Yeah, so, I became aware of him. I couldn't even tell you when. I couldn't tell you how. He's just become a character within the YouTube and TikTok and whatnot algorithm, to where the algorithm likes it, and the algorithm spits it out to other people that consume adjacent content. That's how the internet works these days, and a lot of people make a lot of money doing that. And Jake San Miguel is a 35-year-old from the Dallas area that has, by all accounts, made a lot of money, or made a lot of money for his son, promoting his son, Madden, who's now 10. They started when they were 6, and he's got a following and a brand, and he goes places and people know where he is, and it's either fascinating or disgusting or both. And so, I have 3 children all around the same age. I have one kid that's the exact same grade as Madden. So, I live in this world, and I just wanted to ask him, from dad to dad, what are you doing? Do you see the downside to this? And I was able to, on a chance, talk to Jake and ask him that question. And he is so into what he's done that I don't think he can even see the other side of the coin. I asked him, I was like, Madden's a big kid now. What if he tops out at JV? And he said, well, then he dominates at JV and it's great. And what if God isn't real? Then then all you find out is God isn't real. And I asked him, at one point he compared Madden to Tom Brady. And I was like, Tom Brady's a professional athlete, paid a lot of money to do what he did. Your son is 10. Don't you see the difference there? And his response was, well, yeah, but think about how much money Tom Brady would have made in NIL if they had it back then. Like, I don't think he can see the other side of the coin. And the weird thing about it is I find it gross. I think he's setting his child up to fail, but right now he's winning. And in his mind, this is already a success story because Madden's going to have properties and equity of companies, and he's making TikToks with Libby Dunn, and the concerns of tomorrow are not even thought about. But in his mind, he's already won, and there's nothing anyone can do. I mean, he's in there, and there's no gatekeeper to the industry that can keep him out. Like, Baby Gronk is a character, a brand, and they're all in, and who knows where this ends.
All right, let me back you up for 1 second. You were at a football operations meeting in Frisco, Texas. How do you just recognize there's Baby Gronk? I mean, what is Baby Gronk doing where you are?
Yeah, so the answer to that question is I'm a sick individual with lots of problems. But the reality is, we were in the Omni Hotel, which is adjacent to the Star, which is where the Cowboys practice. They host lots of playoff games, football events, yada, yada, yada. So there's a little field out front that's designed for kids to just kind of run around. It's come in very handy when the older sister has a cheer competition and you have to occupy younger brothers. It's great. But it's not a real field where you'd want to go out and have your team practice. But Baby Gronk was out there in gloves and cleats, running routes, and he had, attracted the attention of other kids in the area. So I had to wait it out because Baby Gronk's dad was talking to people. And the point here is there's no lack of football fields in Frisco, Texas. There's plenty of football fields. There's plenty of places to play football, but they just happen to be, on this fake football field surrounded by a lot of people.
So I can't contribute much to this story. I can show you, this was my view of said room or of said field outside of my hotel room. So there you go. And you can see there. So I looked out and saw a dad down there with his kid and didn't think a thing about it. And 15 minutes later, when I'm in the lobby talking to Zach, he's like, do you know who Baby Gronk is? And I said, yeah. And he goes, I just interviewed the dad. So I was like, man, I flew in from South Bend, Indiana, and this guy's already kicking my butt on getting stories. But he was so fired up for it that I would have wanted to yield my recorder to him. And I couldn't have done a good a job because I wouldn't have been as prepared to interview the persona of Baby Gronk as what Zach so very articulately and artfully was ready to do. So there you go. But shout out also to Gayla Geist, GM of the Omni Frisco, because Team Football Scoop, a.k.a. me, was negligent in getting our rooms booked on time, but she came through in the clutch, and we still got the preferred DFO rate, and she still didn't force Zach and I to share a room, which was a huge win for one of us.
All right, so I'm just letting y'all know. FootballScoop.com has this article. Zach Barnett opened his soul, gave us some insight into the Gronk family, Baby Gronk's family, not the real Gronk's family, Baby Gronk's family. You have to read it. It's true must-read type stuff.
Probably, I'll do this job another 4 years and probably won't get as many bizarre quotes in a single interview as this one.
I don't know how to transition to sports betting, but gosh, can we just have like a moment of silence here for Baby Gronk status?
Isn't it a natural segue to go from one element that so encapsulates society today, and that being social media, to another one, and that being gaming and gambling? Because neither has ever been more pervasive than what it is right now in our country. Isn't it natural in that regard?
I saw a stat yesterday. I think that $220 billion had been bet in like the last sports betting in like the last 4 years in America. Some what?
Yeah. Well, So we might as well dive in. We're obviously talking about the probe into the athletics departments at the University of Iowa and Iowa State University regarding gambling, specifically gambling among current and former student athletes. 26 current student athletes at the University of Iowa, as well as at least one full-time University of Iowa athletics department employee, another 15 at Iowa State University. If I'm not mistaken, another 15 student athletes at Iowa State. If I'm not mistaken, all 42 student athletes are from male sports, all 42 student athletes and the one employee from male sports. And so I think that's really telling. When I dived into that story last night to write it for us at Football Scoop, I was flat out stunned by the volume of wagering that is being done in casinos throughout the state of Iowa. Now, that doesn't mean all that wagering by any stretch is on NCAA competition or sports in general. But when you look at the Iowa Gaming Commission's fiscal reports, and I have those linked in our story on Football Scoop, it was staggering to see the tens of millions of dollars in sports handle being placed. And it was staggering to see, in one case, I think one of the casinos had a fiscal year 23 net revenue of almost $50 million. Net revenue already. Just staggering to see some of those numbers. And so it's big business. I think it's 33, maybe 34 states in our country now that have legalized sports gambling of some sort. I know there have been southern states, frankly, fighting to get more women's sports legalized in gambling to grow it even more in that regard. So the fight for women's placement and how women's sports and athletics are treated is hardly limited to just what the resources are on the playing surface. They want their fans to be able to gamble on their favorite teams as well. That's an absolute real thing that's happening. And I think because of that, as a state government person told me yesterday as the Iowa story was coming out, drip, 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 Brice, this is still going to keep happening.
All right, so let me differentiate a couple things, and then, John, I'm going to look for some more feedback from you. So the Alabama baseball situation, which I think was last week, that was very different than what we're talking about in Iowa. Alabama baseball, that was inside information on that game coming potentially from the head coach. That's a really illegal situation. Inside information is not a great idea, folks. Okay, juxtapose that with the Iowa situation, which, as I understand it, is not inside information. It's not football players betting on football games. It's not coaches on football games. It's student athletes, just like students, using probably some sort of mobile app to bet on college sports or professional sports.
I think
but
college.
Not their sport? Okay.
Right. College sports. They can't bet on any NCAA sports is my understanding of things. And the NFL does have very similar rules in terms of not allowing its players to gamble on professional sports, not only its own sport, that's completely verboten, but then also we saw an NFL player earlier this year suspended because he had placed a bet on his sports app from the parking lot of the team facility, and that's completely forbidden. But at the NCAA level, NCAA student athletes are educated and told they are not allowed to bet on any NCAA sports. I understand at first glance you would probably think, well, as long as they're not betting on their own team or their own sport, that shouldn't be an issue. But in talking with people and with examining this more closely, the concern becomes we've all seen how close-knit a lot of these athletes are on communities. We talked about it. We've written about it. We wrote about it in our DFO meeting story yesterday about people in Dallas last week talking about how important it was for the football team to show up for the lacrosse team. Well, as the betting market grows and there's more and more things able to be wagered on, maybe a football player somewhere knows that his team's best lacrosse player is not going to be able to play in the NCAA tournament coming up. Or maybe a men's basketball player knows that the star women's player is going to be out for the NCAA tournament, and therefore bets on that team to be upset early or bets on that team to lose its Sweet 16 game. So I can see where there would be concern. I think that's why you've seen the Big Ten talk very early about having uniform injury reports in football. And I think that's what you're going to continue to see more and more of, especially as we've seen multiple colleges around the country wholly partner with casino companies or betting companies to do things in their stadiums, to do things to sponsor buildings on campus, athletics facilities, what have you. So I do believe this is just the tip, because there's no regulation right now other than the NCAA saying you simply can't do this, but yet NCAA institutions are partnering with gaming institutions. So it's another one of the great do as I say, not as I do moments in NCAA athletics.
So, John, I believe you answered my question, because the example you brought up, before we were recording is if I'm an Iowa football player and I see Caitlin Clark walking across campus in a boot, I can go bet on Minnesota that night. But there's nothing stopping me, if I'm an Iowa football player, from telling my roommate, "Hey, I saw Caitlin Clark. Here's $50. Let's split it." There's nothing stopping anyone from doing that. So my question was then going to be, how do you prevent that? And it seems like the answer then is just uniform injury reports to democratize this inside information so that everyone has it and everyone's betting on a level playing field. Is that accurate or no?
Yeah, and I think I tried to make that point last night with Nate Brown of Fox Radio, and that is, look how seriously the NFL and all the pro leagues, but especially the NFL, takes its injury report. And that's not for nobility of the game per se, or to deny coaches the opportunity for gamesmanship. That's strictly about a cozy relationship with Vegas that keeps everything above board, instead of Vegas having a way to find out injuries that the common fans or reporters otherwise wouldn't know. So I do think that that's what it's going to have to shift toward as, again, these programs turn to more and more avenues to find revenues, to fund everything on these campuses and to fund their programs and to have the latest and greatest amenities and facilities. So yes, there's nothing from stopping your hypothetical scenario, Zach. But there's also the knowledge that, and it could be a text message, but athletes have more access to athletes on campus than Joe Student does. And so maybe they see a person. Now, again, that guy could still text his buddy and say, "Hey, I'm in here and getting therapy for my hamstring strain, and such is not playing tonight because he or she has blown out her ankle." That's still insider info. But if he's sharing it with a third party, you can never track that down the way you could. And does that information, does he know from talking to her on a Tuesday that she's not playing or he's not playing on Wednesday, but an injury report doesn't come out till Wednesday morning? That still could affect gambling the night before.
Couple of things. You say you could never track down that if you make a call to a third party. Oh, Alabama baseball coach, allow me to say yes, you could track that down. Holy smokes, it's on video. That's incredible. Okay, so I think we have to differentiate two things here. One, all college athletes are given a strong talk at the beginning of every season. It happens on every campus everywhere. I believe this happens everywhere. Thou cannot bet. It is against the rules. You can argue the rule's dumb. You can argue the rule's antiquated, but it is the rule in place. So if you break the rule, there are consequences. Ask the Detroit Lions non-football team guys, but employees of the organization of the club, they got fired because they were betting on, I don't think it was on Lions games. They were betting on something from the property, just like you described. These aren't even they're not on a team. These aren't roster players. These are people who work for the organization. They got fired. It's because you can't have the appearance of any impropriety. That's why the rule's in place. You can argue the rule's dumb. We can have that argument for sure. But if you broke the rule, you broke the rule. That's just there's consequences, and the consequences should be outlined in connection with the rule.
And my point on the third party call was, if Joe Athlete is calling his buddy on campus, and then that buddy is making a bet, that would be the one very impossible to triangulate. Not when a coach is so brazenly communicating with somebody, and that person then is making sports bets inside Great American Ballpark in Cincinnati, which is a great American ballpark.
So I have an overarching question that I'd love to be answered on this podcast, but I don't expect to be. But so from my understanding of the Alabama thing was that nobody bets on college baseball games. And I don't mean that like hyperbolically, like not one person typically bets on a college baseball game. And the fact that there were any bets at all is what set off alarm bells and led them down where they eventually ended up. And so if that's the question, then why do they take bets on college baseball games at all if it's suspicious if they get one bet? Like, what's the point?
I think you're being far too an extreme there. It's not that no one bets. It's that the people who bet, I believe, the market is small for these bettors, but I think they're betting $50, $100, $1,000. I think what raises the red flag is you have a $25,000 or $100,000 bet comes in. They're like, that's odd. Let's roll the tape on that one. Hey, coach was
Yeah, I've got far too many degenerate friends to think that there's no action on college baseball. I know quite contrary. There's action on college baseball. I know some friends who lost some money when Notre Dame denied the Vols that trip to the College World Series last June. So there's absolutely action on college baseball.
It seems like the worst sport to bet on of all time, because even baseball, even in Major League Baseball, the worst team beats the best team 2 out of 5 times. And so now you've got college kids doing it. Like, it just seems like a risky investment to me. But what do I know?
But the worst team beating the best team 2 out of 5 times means even if you're just betting straight up, you're winning more than the house. You're winning 3 out of every 5 bets. Vegas does not want that. So, and then if you have insider information coupled with that, then that increases your odds, which Vegas further does not really like.
The house always wins, though. Just us. But they might throw away some baseball stuff to get you sucked in. Then you're looking for softball, and then you're looking for soccer.
Okay.
And soon enough, they own your house.
All right, let's can we tie this into back to our beat of college football betting? I saw a tweet yesterday that Colorado is like the 20th favorite to win the national championship or something like Colorado is this one sportsbook's biggest liability if they win the national championship. And I tweeted, this is why the house always wins. Colorado's not, they can play this season out 400 times. Colorado's not winning the national championship in any one of those 400.
Yeah, you're right. It was like 8.5% of bets at one book have already come in on Colorado to win the college football playoff championship. And I can't think of a bigger way to quite literally just be lighting money on fire. Zach and I might have made our own friendly wager in Frisco last week about how many games Colorado would win this fall, what we would set the over-under to be. And I promise you that neither of us took anything approaching CFP expectations. We have differing beliefs in those expectations, and that might be a podcast as we continue this summer.
We coming.
We come. Yeah, we come with that podcast. We're not hard to find. We are not hard to find.
I'm on Prime's team. Whoever's on the higher number, I'm with that. Prime can get this thing going, yo.
All right,
that's the Football Scoop podcast. Yeah, you start talking, you start touting Prime, and all right, the director's like, all right, we got to give this thing away.
Yes, we do.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's always a privilege to share our words with you. Thank you for listening. Zach Barnett, John Brice, I'm Scott Roussel. Y'all have a great day. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.